A daring thief baffles police while feeding his ego.
He's not in it to make money. He's doing it just for the sport of it. He enjoys having law enforcement chase after him.
He is addicted to crime. He has to have that rush.
Even after he's caught, authorities still can't stop him.
He is basically like the MacGyver of the criminal world.
He sees himself as the greatest criminal that ever lived.
Find out how he did it next on Masterminds. In 1997, fast food restaurants across California were struck by a series of robberies. The thief's MO was always the same.
He'd climb onto the roof during the hours of darkness and cut a hole in the roof. He'd climb down into the business and find a place to hide and wait until the business opened up in the morning. He would then commit a takeover robbery.
They nicknamed him the Rooftop Robber.
After locking the employees in the freezer, the robber stole cash and disappeared.
He never leaves any evidence at the crime scene. Very clean, no prints, nothing. We were dealing with somebody that knew exactly what he was doing. All the witnesses described him as aggressive and assertive, and he knew what he wanted, but he was always polite.
He didn't yell and scream. He didn't cuss a lot. He gave direct orders and was very well-spoken.
He even went as far as calling the police to let him know that he had robbed the place and that the people were in the freezer.
For 3 years, the rooftop robber evaded authorities, hitting restaurants from coast to coast.
It's very unusual for someone to be able to commit 60 or 65 robberies and not leave enough evidence for the police to figure out who they are.
The frustration that a detective feels when you have a string of robberies, it's just amazing. It keeps you up at night.
Then, on May 20th, 2000, police in North Carolina spot a suspicious man fleeing a McDonald's.
He was caught in a field running away from the business just minutes after it happened.
Jeffrey Allen Manchester, the rooftop robber, is finally captured.
He was proud to talk about what he had done. Mr. Manchester stated quite matter-of-factly that he would have gotten away with that robbery, but he lollygagged too much on his way back to his vehicle. It was the easiest interview I've ever conducted in my life.
The law comes down hard on Jeffrey Manchester. He's sentenced to 45 years in a North Carolina high-security prison for armed robbery and kidnapping.
When you apprehend someone like this and put them away, hopefully for good, then you have such a great feeling of success because you know, it's all solved, it's all taken care of.
Brown Creek Correctional Institution is surrounded by a double fence that has sensors and alarms, and it's patrolled by perimeter patrol vehicles. The facility has 24-hour armed supervision. We have not had any escapes from Brown Creek.
But on June 15th, 2004, when guards do a routine head count, they come up one prisoner short. Jeffrey Manchester is gone.
Inside his locker, they found a cartoon of the Three Stooges with reference to Manchester being Moe, the smart of the Three Stooges, and the department being Larry and Curly, the stupid of the Three Stooges. Everybody was looking for this inmate. We had no clue as to where he was.
Jeffrey Manchester had pulled off the most ingenious prison break in U.S. history. Then, hid in the last place authorities ever expected to find him. The question is, how did he do it? Jeffrey Manchester's amazing escape from one of America's securest prisons comes as no surprise to those who know his past. Manchester grows up in middle-class suburban California. At the age of 18, he enlists in the Army and is stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
He received special ops training or been in some type of special forces. I think Manchester's motivation was in a sense of excitement and adventure, an adrenaline rush that he didn't get out of his normal life.
But Manchester's thrill-seeking gets him in trouble. He becomes the scapegoat in a botched Central American covert operation.
The military would never go into great detail what the deal was, but for some reason he went from full-time status to reserve status, and I think that hurt his pride a little bit.
Stripped of his combat status, Manchester satisfies his need for excitement by turning to a life of crime.
The Army would send him to different states, and that's where he would commit his robberies. So that's why the robberies were all over the different states.
Over several months, Manchester masters a perfect MO.
Jeffrey Manchester is a serial robber. He enjoys committing the crime and then having law enforcement chase after him.
Just felt like he was invincible and nobody can catch me. When he was apprehended by these small town police department, it had to have been just obliterating to his ego.
The 45-year sentence to him was a life sentence, and he thought that was extremely unfair. And from the time that the judge said 45 years, he began planning on getting out.
He sees an opportunity after noticing a truck leaving the prison metal shop.
This vehicle would pull inside the perimeter of the prison every day and pull outside of the perimeter every day.
Getting a job as a welder, Manchester familiarizes himself with the truck's delivery schedule.
He would have observed the trucks going in and out, observed the officers to see how they check the trucks to try to find weaknesses in those security checks. Correctional officers have a mirror that they can look up under the truck with. They open the back door, they search the inside of the truck to ensure that no inmates are hiding on the truck.
Manchester realizes the only way he can escape in the truck is to make himself invisible.
He went underneath that truck and measured the width and length of the frame rails underneath the box part of the truck. With his measurements, he went back to his workstation.
With screens around him for eye protection, it would also prevent people from seeing what kind of work he was doing.
He had a piece of plywood that would fit inside of those frame rails. He did painted that plywood black.
He is basically like the MacGyver of the criminal world. He can take anything and make it into something.
Manchester then creates clothes for after his escape.
He took a brown prison uniform and cut off the sleeves and sewed patches over the prison numbers to make it look like a civilian shirt. He took long brown prison pants and cut them off into shorts and made cargo pockets.
Manchester now barters cigarettes for information about the surrounding area.
He discussed with lots of other inmates about where to go, how to hide, how to survive outside the jail.
He targets the city of Charlotte, knowing he can get there quickly and hide before police track him down. Then on June 15th, 2004, with his getaway gear hidden in the truck, Manchester strikes.
He climbed up under the truck very quickly.
Using his custom-made board as a platform, he conceals himself in the chassis.
You're not going to see him at all unless you actually climb up underneath the truck and look up.
Manchester prepares himself for a hazardous ride.
He was able to obtain a mask to protect his face and his breathing.
His entire escape plan hinges on an illusion.
Because it was dark under the truck, because the board was black, the correctional officer that checked the truck would have seen the optical illusion.
He had everything stepped through perfectly, what he was going to do, where he was going to go, how he was going to do it, and he followed through with it completely.
Approximately 4 o'clock, the truck left the facility.
After serving 4 months, Jeffrey Manchester becomes the first prisoner ever to escape from Brown Creek Prison, and he's only just started toying with authorities. After a daring prison break, rooftop robber Jeffrey Manchester is on the run.
He steps out at the front of the facility and hitches a ride.
He hitchhiked several different rides to make his way to Charlotte and was eventually dropped off on Independence Boulevard right in front of a Toys R Us store.
With police combing the area, Manchester takes refuge in the store.
He's looking at where can I sleep, where can I eat, how can I come and go.
He walked in as a customer and just stayed inside the building until after it closed.
Deciding he can't leave the store until the police search dies down, Manchester creates a hiding space.
Toys R Us has everything that he was looking for. It has bedding, it has food, albeit baby food. He found a small place to sleep inside the store behind a display.
After the staff has gone for the day, Manchester uses his military training to break into the manager's office.
Obviously, a business of this nature is going to have a pretty sophisticated camera, video, and alarm system. He read the book that governed how to operate the camera system and the alarm system. He knew more about the system than the people that have that system in their business do. He knew how to override. He knew how to turn things on, turn things off.
Manchester can now move around and not be caught on tape.
And he stays there for weeks and weeks without ever being noticed.
I still scratch my head wondering how Mr. Manchester went undetected for so long. Then he learns that due to the Christmas holidays, there are going to be employees and the Toys R Us virtually 24 hours a day. He knew that would make his life quite more complicated than it already was.
Concerned he'll be discovered, he looks for a new hiding place.
He noticed that the building adjacent to Toys R Us is the vacant Circuit City store.
The Toys R Us building is actually connected to the Circuit City building. They share a common wall.
He climbed out of the Toys R Us roof one evening and climbed over onto the Circuit City. He drilled holes through the roof hatch and knocked out an opening big enough for him to climb through. He lowered himself through the opening, climbed down into the Circuit City, and kind of reconned the store.
Inside the Circuit City, Manchester discovers just what he's looking for.
He removes part of the wall and finds this space beneath the stairwell. And it is small. It's dark and dirty, but it's a space that he can hide in.
Manchester now designs and builds the perfect living quarters.
He creates electrical outlets for himself so he can plug in a TV and radio.
He rerouted an air conditioning duct into the room so that he could have fresh air.
Returning to Toys R Us, he now finds an ideal location to create a passageway between the two stores.
In the wall of the Toys R Us building, he removes cinder blocks to where he can crawl through into the Circuit City.
The new doorway gave him a lot more freedom.
Mr. Manchester obviously was quite resourceful, a whole lot more than I would be if I was in that situation, and he was able to gather whatever he needed. He'd either buy it or find it or steal it.
Inside this little room, this cubby hole that he's living in, he's got a mattress to sleep on, he has his shelves, he has lots of things to take care of himself. He'd also created a way to watch the front of the Toys R Us store. He obtained a baby monitor, kind of like a nanny cam, from inside Toys R Us, and now he can monitor the front of the business.
Mr. Manchester was satisfied with living inside of that Circuit City, right under the noses of law enforcement agencies that had captured him in the first place.
But months of being cooped up begin to wear on Manchester.
He is longing for some companionship conversation, some interaction with someone else.
For the first time, Manchester ventures out into the community.
He purposely stayed clean-shaven, got haircuts, dressed well, because he knew that in people's minds that if he was dressed well and looked neat in appearance, he was not a threat to them.
But without cash, Manchester doesn't have the means to reinvent himself.
He decided to commit a robbery at the Toys R Us.
Jeffrey planned this robbery just like he plans everything else. It was very detailed, very meticulous.
But there's one thing he's missing.
Traditionally, he always had a gun. Well, he didn't have a gun. I got to get a gun.
He went to a nearby gun store and climbed up on top of the building and cut a hole in the roof to gain access. Once inside the gun store, he stole 4 handguns and left the building.
Then on November 28, 2004, Manchester strikes the Toys R Us.
The first thing he does when he gets to the front of the store is order everyone to the floor, everybody down. He takes the manager to the safe, gets the money from the safe, and then exits the store.
He ran to the back of the business and tripped the alarm on the fire exit to make it appear as if he had escaped the building.
And in their mind, he's running out the back of the store and he's gone. But really, he slipped through his little hidey hole and went into his apartment.
Scoring $15,000, Manchester relaxes, only a few feet from the scene of the crime.
Mr. Manchester watched the police respond over the baby monitor.
I believe Mr. Manchester is kind of patting himself on the back. They still haven't caught me. I escaped from prison and I've been doing all this stuff. His ego's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, as with everyone, one day that's going to explode on you.
With enough money in his pocket to bankroll his freedom, Manchester begins to establish a new identity for himself.
He'd go jogging and he started to attend church. He befriended several people, including the pastor, and they all knew him by name.
He chose the alias of John Zorin. He felt that that name instilled power.
He spent time with the children, provided the gifts, albeit that they were stolen, and he became an active participant in the church.
Who's that?
Manchester then meets a church volunteer named Lee Westcott.
Mr. Manchester explains to Lee that he was some sort of an agent for the government doing spy work. And she bought the whole story. I believe that Lee really felt strongly about Mr. Manchester, believed in him, cared about him.
They did fall for each other and they were developing a close relationship and spending a lot of time together.
He could have assumed this whole new clean life and identity, living with Lee, maybe marrying Lee. However, he is addicted to crime. He has to have the adventure and he can't let go.
Unable to resist, Manchester commits yet another robbery.
He enters into Toys R Us and approaches the security guard. He is able to take her very quickly and immediately disarms her.
But it backfired on him.
Other employees began to run to the back of the store. Jeffrey orders them to stop, but they don't. They're just running.
Panic mode had to set in even with Mr. Perfect.
He lost control and he decided to abort the mission. He ran toward the back of the store and went directly to the hole in the wall between the two stores without going to the rear fire door and triggering the alarm like he had planned to and like he'd done in the first robbery.
When police arrive, they search every inch of the Toys R Us.
Going through all the responding law enforcement officers' minds, he's still in this store. We have to find him.
And police officers were able to discover the hole in the stockroom that led into the Circuit City.
Combing the abandoned warehouse, investigators make another discovery.
There was a hiding space in there that somebody obviously had elaborately set up as the living quarters.
But the suspect's not there.
An evidence technician was called out to start processing that scene for any type of evidence.
We found one fingerprint inside the room on the video, Catch Me If You Can, the Tom Hanks movie. I think it's coincidence, but it's a pretty funny one.
Police determine the print belongs to escaped convict Jeffrey Manchester.
Immediately, we decided to make a wanted poster of Mr. Manchester.
We had 1,000 flyers asking people, have you seen this guy?
2 concerned citizens said, we know that guy. His name's not Jeffrey Manchester, it's John Zorin, that he was dating Lee Westcott.
Police show Westcott the wanted poster.
The detectives explained to her that he was an escapee from a nearby prison and that he was wanted for armed robbery. She does not believe what the detectives had told her.
She was in a bit of denial, which is normal.
We explained to her about the fact that her boyfriend had been profiled on America's Most Wanted and that we could show her some information on a computer.
She saw it on the internet, and at that point, it was no denying it. And she was on board from that minute on.
Westcott tells police that Manchester is planning on seeing her later that evening.
He was going to take her out to dinner, and then he was going to leave on a special assignment, and she wouldn't see him again for a while.
As Manchester arrives at Westcott's house, police strike.
He didn't have a chance to fight or run because it happened so quickly.
He knew that he had been caught. He knew that he had been gotten, and that was the end.
After 7 months on the loose, Jeffrey Manchester is returned to prison.
Jeffrey Manchester is currently being housed in maximum control, which means that he spends 23 hours a day in a cell.
Mr. Manchester sees himself as the greatest criminal that ever lived. His ego is absolutely enormous.
He was a mastermind. You choose hobbies that you have an interest in and an aptitude for. He had an interest and an aptitude toward committing robberies.
He thought he was above the law and that he could do these robberies and never get caught, but no one's above the law.
He just made some human errors, and his human errors are what got him caught in the end. He had to go back and see Lee one last time before he left town. If he hadn't have done that, he'd still be on the run today.
I know.